Why did the air feel heavier that morning, as if the base itself was holding its breath? No one could explain it, not the soldiers lined in perfect rows, not the frost biting through gloves, not even the stopwatch ticking uselessly in the cold. Fort Redstone Ridge had seen discipline, shouting, punishment, and pride, but that morning silence arrived first, and it stayed. When Captain Reed Slater's voice cut through the formation, it wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "You, Whitlow, take off your uniform." The words landed wrong, like something dropped where it didn't belong. A few heads turned before they remembered better. Someone stopped mid-stretch. Breath hung in the air, fogged and suspended. The wind carried the sound of Velcro as Slater stepped closer, ripping the name tape from her chest like he was tearing out proof that she'd ever earned it. "You don't belong here," he said, his voice tight with certainty. "Women like you disgrace this uniform." May Whitlow didn't flinch. She nodded once, not in surrender, not in agreement, just acknowledgement. Then she began unbuttoning her jacket slowly, deliberately, as if she were following an order she'd already anticipated. Every movement was precise, calm, familiar. She folded the jacket neatly, placed it on the concrete. No one spoke. Her tank top clung to her back, regulation gray, unremarkable, until she turned, until the world saw what lived there. 31 names, dates, coordinates, inked not for decoration but for memory, for weight. At the center, one name stopped time completely. Caleb Graves, Naller Ridge, 2011. And beneath it, in handwriting that looked more like a promise than a quote, "Tell her she's the bravest I ever saw." High above the parade ground, a tin mug slipped from a general's hand and shattered against concrete. And in that sound, sharp, final, everything changed. But this moment hadn't begun here. It never does. 2 months earlier, May Whitlow had been invisible. That was the point. She worked in Building 5A between supply and personnel, where fluorescent lights hummed and paperwork swallowed hours whole. Her posture was perfect. Her ID always visible. Her coffee never late. To most, she was a contractor, temporary, replaceable. To Captain Slater, she was convenient. He didn't like things he couldn't dominate. Civilian or not, he assigned her tasks meant to humiliate. Latrines, inventory after midnight, PT evaluations designed to fail. When she didn't protest, he escalated. When she didn't break, he watched her harder. But May had learned long ago that survival wasn't loud. Master Sergeant Micah Chen noticed first. The way she tracked movement without turning her head. The rhythm her fingers tapped when she thought no one was watching. The mud on her boots after lunch, like she'd been somewhere no one had authorized. "You weren't always admin," he said once. She blinked, then went back to typing. That night alone in the server room, May plugged in a drive no one knew to look for. A signal pulsed once, traveled far, then disappeared. Her personnel file was flawless. Civilian analyst, archived assignments, expired clearance. But buried deep in metadata, unseen by eyes that didn't know how to search, was a single line. Spectre Division deactivated. Some ghosts don't haunt. They observe. And May Whitlow had been watching Redstone Ridge very carefully. The exhaustion came next. Shifts stacked without rest. Audits scheduled impossibly. 3 hours of sleep if she was lucky. Slater called it discipline. Chen called it what it was. Bruises began to appear. Finger marks hidden beneath sleeves. Wrist welts explained away as clumsiness. When Chen told her she didn't have to take it, she met his eyes only long enough to say, "I've taken worse." Late one night, May made a call she hadn't wanted to make. "I need more time," she said softly. 5 lives already fractured, 1 nearly lost. That was the line she wouldn't cross. Under her floorboard lay a folder, photos, deleted rosters, statements, and a letter creased, smudged, desperate, from a mother in Iowa whose daughter hadn't failed selection, She'd been broken by it. "He told me I wasn't built for war," the letter read. "But I was never at war with the enemy. I was at war with him." Doors had closed, records vanished. Then someone whispered a name. "Find Whitlow." So May stayed, not for revenge, not for glory. For truth. The morning General Graves arrived. The base felt it before it saw him. Slater struck first. Accusations, lies delivered confidently, orders given without witnesses. He thought speed would protect him. "Take it off," he snapped. May asked only that they remember. When she revealed her back, silence answered for her. General Graves stepped forward, eyes fixed not on her rank but on his son's name. "You carried him home," he said. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Slater unraveled quickly after that. Entitlement was his last weapon, and it failed him too. Investigations followed, evidence surfaced. A pattern emerged, quiet, systemic, cruel. May's files became the map. When the dust settled, the army offered her everything it knew how to give. She declined. "I've served my wars," she said. "It's time others lead better." Instead, she built something new, a foundation, a bridge, a way for voices to be heard before they vanished. Months later, a recruit struggled at the wall, fell, climbed again, made it. From the shadows, May watched. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. At a quiet grave, she placed a coin beside a name etched in stone. "His words pulled me back," she thought. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't fighting. Sometimes it's staying. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did no one notice when the pressure started to tighten around her? Slowly, deliberately, like a hand learning where the bones are weakest. At first it looked like nothing. That was the brilliance of it. No single moment to point at. No clear bruise the system couldn't explain away. Just small adjustments, tiny inconveniences. The kind that on paper looked reasonable, necessary even. May Whitlow felt it immediately. The duty rosters began to bend in unnatural ways. Late nights followed by pre-dawn calls. Buildings assigned miles apart with minutes between check-ins. Inventory audits that overlapped mandatory PT. No margin. No recovery. A quiet test of endurance designed to see when she would crack. She didn't. She adjusted her breathing, shortened her sleep cycles, ate less but smarter, moved with efficiency that came from years when rest was a luxury and pain was just another signal to interpret. Captain Reed Slater watched her closely now. He leaned against railings during inspections, arms crossed, eyes sharp, not the eyes of a leader but of a man measuring resistance. He smiled when she showed up on time despite impossible scheduling, smiled wider when her hands trembled from fatigue before she forced them still. "Character building," he said once, loud enough for others to hear. May nodded, took notes, completed the task. Inside, something colder than anger settled in her chest, a familiar weight, the kind that comes when you recognize a pattern you've survived before. Master Sergeant Micah Chen noticed the details others missed. He saw how her gaze flicked instinctively to exits, how she positioned herself near walls without thinking, how she never let anyone stand directly behind her. One afternoon, he caught sight of her wrist when she reached for a file. Dark red marks ringed the skin, already fatting. "That from inventory?" he asked quietly. She didn't pull her hand away, didn't lie, just said no. Chen exhaled slowly through his nose. He'd worn rank long enough to know when something wasn't adding up. "You can report him," he said. "There are channels." Her eyes met his then, not defiant, not afraid, just tired. "Channels only work when someone's listening," she replied. That night, alone in her apartment, May sat on the floor with her back against the wall, boots still on. The room was small, sparse, temporary, like she never intended to stay long. She dialed a number she hadn't used in years. The line crackled before a voice answered, older now, worn. "You're not dead," the voice said. "No," May replied, "but someone else almost is." Silence stretched. "They've built a system," she continued. "Quiet, clean, no fingerprints. He knows where the cameras don't look." Another pause, heavier. "You said you were done," the voice said. "I was," May answered. "Then they trusted me." She hung up before promises could be made. From beneath the floorboard she pulled the folder, evidence collected slowly, patiently. Photographs of bruises taken days apart, screenshots before rosters were altered, handwritten notes detailing tone, timing, witnesses present or absent. At the bottom was the letter. The mother's handwriting shook across the page, uneven and desperate. May read it every time she needed to remember why she was still here. He told her she didn't belong, that she was weak, that quitting would save everyone the trouble. May closed her eyes. She heard those words before, in another place, another war. The next morning she stood near the obstacle course fence, sunglasses hiding her eyes. Slater shouted at candidates, his voice sharp, practiced. He knew exactly how loud to be without crossing lines, exactly how long to stare. May watched the reactions instead, who flinched, who internalized, who looked down when shouted at and who stared back just a second too long before learning better. This wasn't random. It never was. That evening, a female candidate collapsed during PT, heat exhaustion officially. Unofficially, sleep deprivation layered over stress and fear. As medics worked, Slater stood with his hands on his hips. "She wasn't cut out for it," he said. "Better she learns now." May wrote the time down later, the phrasing, the witnesses. One more thread. The base buzzed with rumors by the end of the week. Whispers passed in hallways. Eyes lingered when Slater walked by. He felt it. You could see it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his orders became sharper. Predators sense when the environment shifts. So he escalated. The inspection announcement came suddenly. Formation, full turnout, base command present, unusual enough to raise eyebrows, dangerous enough to make Slater nervous. He struck before anyone else could. Accusations flew, confidence manufactured. He spoke fast, hopping momentum would bury doubt. May stood still, hands folded behind her back, heart steady. When he ordered her to surrender her uniform publicly, something inside her loosened. This, she realized, was the moment. As she unzipped the jacket, she felt every eye, the weight of judgment, the old instinct to brace for impact. When the tattoo was revealed, the air changed temperature. Shock spread like a physical force, names read silently, recognition dawning slowly, painfully. When General Graves stepped forward, May felt something she hadn't allowed herself in years. Relief. Not for herself. For the truth. Later, when the MPs led Slater away, May didn't watch. She turned instead toward the women standing rigid, unsure whether to breathe. "You're still standing," she told them quietly. "That matters." One of them, eyes red, jaw trembling, whispered, "I thought it was just me." May shook her head once. "It never is." The investigation that followed was thorough, ugly, necessary. Records resurfaced. Patterns emerged. Transfers that made no sense until they did. May's evidence held steady under scrutiny. Dates matched. Testimonies aligned. The silence broke. When the Army offered her reinstatement, medals, a podium, she declined without hesitation. "I don't need recognition," she said. "I needed it to stop." So she built something quieter, a place where whispers were enough, where reporting didn't require courage that already cost too much. Months later, watching a recruit clear the wall on her third try, May felt a subtle shift inside her chest. Not pride. Hope. She touched the edge of the tattoo beneath her collar, 31 names, then one more. Not lost. Saved. Because sometimes the strongest thing a soldier can do isn't fight. Sometimes it's stay long enough to make sure no one else fights alone. Why did the nights grow louder once the truth began to surface? Like the base itself was resisting what it knew was coming. May Whitlow felt it most after sundown. Daylight at Fort Redstone Ridge had always been performative. Orders barked, boots aligned, protocol worn like armor, but night stripped things down, left only what people did when they believed no one important was watching. She stayed late now, not because she had to, but because patterns revealed themselves in the quiet hours. Lights left on in offices that shouldn't have been occupied. Keycard logs accessed and erased within minutes. Phones that rang once and went dead. The system was trying to protect itself. Captain Slater was gone, but men like him never worked alone. They built buffers, dependencies, quiet agreements that said, if you protect me, I'll protect you. May knew that architecture well. She sat in the server room again, the hum of machines steady and indifferent. Her fingers moved carefully, deliberately. She didn't rush. Rushing led to mistakes, and mistakes were what the system counted on. Files opened, cross-referenced, closed. She found it there, buried under a training compliance review. A list of names rerouted over 5 years. Officers reassigned just before complaints became formal. Investigations marked, resolved, without conclusions. It wasn't chaos. It was design. A familiar tightness settled behind her ribs. Not fear, not anger. Grief. Because she knew how many people it took to keep something like this alive. How many looked away. How many told themselves it wasn't their job. Her phone buzzed once, a message with no sender ID. Stop digging. She stared at the screen, pulse steady. She deleted it without reply. Outside, rain began to fall, slow, deliberate drops tapping against the narrow window like someone asking permission to enter. Master Sergeant Chen found her later, leaning in the doorway like he had weeks before, but his face was different now, older, heavier. They're moving people, he said quietly, fast. I know, May replied without looking up. You put a lot in motion, he continued. Some of it won't like being exposed. She finally turned to face him. Truth doesn't need permission. Chen exhaled. You shouldn't be alone. I haven't been, she said, and for the first time she believed it. The following days brought interviews, statements, controlled chaos, officers who spoke too carefully, others who spoke too much, eager to redirect blame. May answered questions plainly. No embellishment, no bitterness. She knew credibility wasn't about emotion, it was about consistency. When asked why she hadn't reported earlier, she paused. Because I needed it to be undeniable, she said, and because I needed the ones being hurt to still have careers when it ended. That answer unsettled them. Good. At night, sleep came in fragments. Dreams stitched together old terrain with new faces. A ridge line bleeding into a parade ground. Radio static merging with shouted orders. Caleb's voice, not loud, never loud, cutting through it all. Tell her. She woke with her jaw clenched, heart steady but heavy. One evening, as she left the administrative building, she noticed a car parked too close to hers. Engine off, windows dark. She didn't change her pace, didn't look directly at it, just adjusted her path slightly, keys already threaded between her fingers. The car never moved. Still, she noted the time, the model, the plate. Old habits didn't fade, they waited. The pressure reached a peak the day the preliminary findings were leaked. Unofficial channels buzzed, rumors spiraled, names were guessed, accusations misfired, innocent people grew nervous, guilty ones grew quiet. May sat alone in her apartment, listening to the city hum beyond the window. She poured herself a glass of water and let it sit untouched on the table. This was always the most dangerous part. Not the exposure. The aftermath. Her phone rang. This time she answered. "You should have stayed gone," the voice said, familiar, calm, careful. "I did," May replied. "You followed." A pause. "You think this ends with paperwork?" "I think it ends with truth," she said. "What happens after is your choice." Silence, then the line went dead. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she organized. Backups duplicated. Files mirrored in places that couldn't be erased quietly. She mailed physical copies to 3 addresses she trusted, one of them belonging to a woman she'd never met but whose daughter had trusted her. Insurance. The next morning, General Graves requested to see her privately. His office was spare, functional, no excess, the kind of space built by a man who understood restraint. "You don't like attention," he said without preamble. "No, sir. And yet you've caused quite a lot of it." She met his eyes. "I didn't cause it, I uncovered it." A long silence followed, not uncomfortable, thoughtful. "My son believed in doing things the right way," Graves said finally, "even when it cost him." May swallowed. The words pressed against something she rarely allowed to surface. "He believed people mattered," Graves continued, "more than systems." "Yes, sir." Graves nodded once. "So do I." When she left his office, the weight she carried felt altered, still heavy, but shared. The formal report dropped a week later. Charges, suspensions, names printed in black and white, the network exposed not as rumor but as fact. The base reacted in waves: relief, anger, shame, gratitude. One afternoon, a young corporal stopped May outside the parking lot, hesitant, nervous. "My sister went through selection here," she said. "Years ago she quit. We thought she was weak." May studied her face, the guilt etched deep. "She wasn't," May said gently. The corporal nodded, eyes wet. "I know that now." That night May returned to the Foundation's temporary office, a rented space with folding tables and borrowed chairs. The phone rang constantly. Emails stacked faster than she could read them. Stories poured in. Some old, some ongoing, some barely formed, written by people afraid of their own words. May listened. She didn't interrupt, didn't judge. She let silence do its work. And slowly, something began to shift inside her. For years she had measured success by extraction, by survival, by getting out. Now she measured it differently. By how many stayed. Late one evening she stepped outside, the air cool and clear. She looked up at the dark sky, stars scattered without pattern or permission. "I did what you asked," she whispered, not to a grave, not to a memory, but to the quiet itself. For the first time in a long while, the quiet answered back. Not with ghosts, with peace. Why did it feel harder to breathe once the fight was over? Like the silence afterward carried more weight than the battle itself. May Whitlow hadn't expected that part. She lived most of her life braced against impact, trained to move toward pressure, not away from it. Danger had always been simple in that way, visible, immediate, demanding action. But this was different. The truth was out now. Names were printed, orders reversed, careers paused or ended. And yet the world hadn't slowed down to mark the moment. It just kept moving. The Foundation's office filled quickly, not with noise but with stories. They arrived cautiously at first. Emails written and deleted 3 times before being sent. Phone calls that began with apologies for bothering her. Messages that circled their point like frightened animals. May read every one. Some described things she already knew. Others revealed angles she hadn't considered. The common thread wasn't violence. It was erosion. Confidence stripped away piece by piece. Trust hollowed out until there was nothing left to stand on. She sat late most nights, the glow of her laptop reflecting faintly in the window, her own face looking back at her like someone she almost recognized. This was the part no one trained you for. Holding space. One evening, a former lieutenant sat across from her at the folding table, hands wrapped tightly around a paper cup. His voice shook when he spoke. "I watched it happen," he said. "I told myself it wasn't my place." May didn't rush to respond. She let the silence settle between them. "What would you do differently now?" she asked. He swallowed everything. She nodded once, then start there. Not forgiveness, not absolution. Responsibility. Outside the office, Fort Redstone Ridge was changing in subtle ways. New oversight teams arrived. Briefings were rewritten. Language softened, not weaker, just more precise. Leaders hesitated before speaking the way they once had without thought. Some resented it. They called it fragility, political correctness, the loss of tradition. May heard those words before she saw the people who spoke them. She recognized the tone, defensive, fearful, afraid of losing power they'd never examined. She didn't argue. She learned that transformation rarely came from debate. It came from example, from presence. General Graves invited her to observe a revised selection briefing one morning. She stood at the back of the room, arms crossed loosely, unnoticed by most. The commander spoke carefully, acknowledging the difficulty of the program without glorifying suffering. Stress would be high, he said, but dignity would remain intact. May watched the candidates' faces, some skeptical, some relieved. One young woman in the second row exhaled visibly, like she'd been holding her breath for days. Afterward, Graves joined May in the hallway. "This isn't perfect," he said. "No," May agreed, "but it's honest." That mattered more. Still, the nights remained restless. Sleep came in short stretches, interrupted by memories she hadn't invited. A ridge line under moonlight, a radio pressed tight to her ear, blood soaking into dirt that refused to remember names. She woke one night with her hand gripping the edge of the mattress, heart steady but aching. Survivor's guilt wasn't loud. It was patient. The next day, she drove without thinking, following roads that felt familiar until she realized where she was going. Snowbridge Cemetery rose quietly at the end of the road, headstones neat and unassuming. Caleb's marker hadn't changed. She knelt, brushing away a few fallen leaves. The stone was cold under her fingers. "I don't know how to stop," she said softly, helping them, holding all of it. The wind moved through the trees, not answering but not dismissing her either. She placed a challenge coin beside the headstone, one from the foundation, newly minted, still sharp. "Maybe I don't stop," she murmured. "Maybe I just learn how to carry it better." Back at the base, resistance surfaced in quieter forms, delayed approvals, funding questions, meetings postponed without explanation. May expected it. Change threatened comfort. She documented everything, again. Not because she feared retaliation, but because she understood momentum, understood how easily progress could stall if not guarded. One afternoon, she received a call from an unfamiliar number. The voice on the other end was young, nervous. "Ma'am," the caller said, "I was told to contact you if I needed advice." May leaned back in her chair. "You're allowed to need advice," she replied. There was a pause, then a shaky laugh, relief bleeding through. They talked for an hour. About fear, about doubt, about the difference between weakness and exhaustion. When the call ended, May stared at the blank screen for a long moment. This, she realized, was the work now. Not exposure. Continuation. Weeks passed. The foundation expanded beyond what she'd imagined. Legal advisors volunteered time. Therapists offered services at reduced rates. Former service members stepped forward, lending credibility and muscle. Still, May kept herself at the edges. She didn't want to become a symbol. Symbols stopped being human. One evening, Master Sergeant Chen visited the office, leaning against the doorframe like he used to. Same posture, same watchful eyes. You look tired, he said. She smiled faintly. I am. Regret it. She considered the question seriously. No, she said at last, but I didn't realize how much silence I was carrying until it broke. Chen nodded. That's how it gets you. They stood there for a moment, listening to phones ring, papers shuffle. You did good, he said finally. May shook her head slightly. I did necessary. The next selection cycle began under new scrutiny. May didn't attend the opening day. She didn't need to. But she found herself nearby anyway, watching from a distance as candidates ran the ridge trail. Their movements were clumsy, determined, human. One stumbled, got up, another offered a hand. May felt something loosen in her chest. Progress wasn't dramatic. It was incremental and fragile. That night she added another name beneath the tattoo, not fallen but reclaimed. Someone who had stayed, someone who had spoken. Her fingers lingered over the ink afterward, tracing the lines gently. She understood now that redemption wasn't a single act. It was maintenance. A choice made again and again, even when no one was watching. Especially then. As she turned off the light and prepared for sleep, May felt the quiet settle, not heavy this time but full. Not empty. Held. And for the first time since she'd stepped back into this world, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the hardest part wasn't surviving the fight. It was learning how to live after winning it. Why did it feel like the world was finally listening, just as she was no longer sure she wanted to speak? May Whitlow noticed the shift not in headlines or briefings, but in pauses, the half-seconds before people spoke, the way officers checked themselves mid-sentence, the way doors that once closed without thought now stayed open a moment longer, as if waiting for permission. She moved through it quietly. The foundation had outgrown its borrowed office. Desks were no longer folding. Phones rang constantly. Names filled whiteboards, cases active, cases pending, cases resolved. Each one carried weight, not because of rank or outcome, but because someone had finally decided not to stay silent. May sat at the center of it all and felt oddly peripheral. That bothered her more than she expected. She had built her life on purpose, missions with defined objectives, extraction points, clear endings. This work had none of that. It bled outward, refused containment. Every resolved case revealed two more waiting in the shadows. There were nights she stared at the ceiling, wondering when enough would be enough. If such a thing even existed. An invitation arrived she didn't want. A panel, senior leadership, cameras, a chance to share her story. She folded the letter once, then twice. Then set it aside. General Graves called her the next day. You don't owe them anything, he said plainly. I know. But you're considering it. May was quiet for a moment. I'm afraid if I talk too much, they'll turn this into a moment instead of a movement. Graves exhaled softly. That's a fair fear. In the end, she agreed to attend, on one condition. No spotlight. No speech. Just presence. The room was full when she arrived. Polished uniforms, civilian suits, a low hum of conversation that dimmed when people noticed her. She took a seat at the end of the table, hands folded, eyes attentive. The discussions were careful, policy language, oversight frameworks, accountability models. Important. Necessary. But abstract. Then a young captain stood. My sister went through selection, she said, voice steady but tight. She didn't make it. We blamed her. I blamed her. Until this. She gestured not at May, but at the space the foundation had created. I don't want another family learning too late. The room went still. May felt something twist inside her chest. Not pain, not pride. Recognition. After the panel, people approached her in ones and twos. Quiet thank yous, quick nods, stories offered but not demanded. She accepted them gently. On the drive home, she realized her hands were shaking. Not fear. Fatigue. She pulled over, resting her forehead against the steering wheel. Let herself breathe until the tremor passed. Strength she'd learned wasn't infinite. You had to tend it. That weekend she disappeared. No announcements, no forwarding number, just a bag, an old truck, and a stretch of road that led somewhere with trees and no reception. She spent days doing nothing that mattered to anyone else, cooking simple food, walking without purpose, sleeping when her body asked. At night she sat by a fire and listened to it crackle. The sound grounded her in ways voices never could. Memories came as they always did, but they didn't overwhelm her this time. They passed like weather, not erased, not invited, just allowed. On the fourth morning, she woke before dawn and realized something had shifted. She wasn't running anymore. When she returned, the foundation was still there, still moving, still holding. They didn't need her to be everything. They needed her to be steady. A message waited in her inbox from a former recruit, short, simple. I stayed because of you. May closed her eyes, letting the words settle. That was enough. She visited Snowbridge again that evening. No ceremony, no coins, just presence. I'm still here, she said quietly, still trying. The wind moved through the grass, familiar now. Back at the base, selection continued, adjusted, imperfect, but watched. May stood once more at the edge of the course as candidates ran the ridge. One faltered near the top, breath ragged, legs shaking. Another slowed, stayed with her. They finished together. May smiled, small, private. Later that night, she traced the tattoo on her back, counting the names without dread. Each one a reminder not just of loss but of responsibility. She added none that night. Instead, she slept deeply. Because she finally understood something she'd never allowed herself before. Silence can be a wound, but it can also be a space. And sometimes, the bravest thing isn't filling it with words. It's choosing again and again to remain present within it. Why did the quiet feel different now? Not empty, not heavy, but like something finally set down. May Whitlow noticed it on an ordinary morning. No formation, no briefing, just sunlight slipping through the kitchen window, catching dust in the air. For once her body woke before her instincts did. No immediate scan of exits, no inventory of threats, just breath, slow, unforced. It unsettled her. Peace often did. She dressed without ceremony and stepped outside. The world moved the way it always had, cars passing, people heading somewhere important to them. But she felt, for the first time in a long while, slightly apart from it. Not disconnected, just no longer braced against it. At the foundation, the work continued without drama. Cases opened, cases closed, others transferred into hands better suited to carry them forward. May had learned to let go of control without letting go of care, a delicate balance, one she practiced daily. She no longer took every call herself, no longer stayed until the lights flickered off automatically. Instead, she trained others, taught them how to listen without absorbing, how to document without dehumanizing, how to sit with pain without trying to fix it too quickly. You can't save everyone, she told them, but you can make sure no one is erased. Those words felt earned now. One afternoon, a young woman waited after a workshop, nervous, determined. The look was familiar. I don't know if I'm strong enough, she said. May studied her for a long moment. Strength isn't what keeps you here, she replied. Clarity does. The woman frowned. Clarity about what? About who you are when no one is watching, May said gently, and what you're willing to stand beside. The woman nodded slowly, like something inside her had clicked into place. That night May drove without destination, ending up once again near Fort Redstone Ridge. She didn't go inside. Didn't need to. The base stood as it always had, concrete and order and history layered thick, but it no longer pulled at her. It had been a chapter, not the whole story. She parked and walked until the sounds of engines faded. The stars were sharp overhead, unapologetic, unranked. Caleb's voice came to her then, not as memory but as echo, not words exactly, intention. "You stayed." She exhaled, something loosening deep in her chest. "Yes," she whispered, "I did." In the weeks that followed, the Foundation marked a milestone quietly. 100 cases resolved, not announced, not celebrated publicly, just noted with a shared meal and a moment of silence for those who hadn't made it this far. May watched the room, faces once drawn tight now softer, still serious but no longer alone. She realized then that leadership didn't always mean standing in front. Sometimes it meant knowing when to step back. The next selection cycle began without her watching from the shadows. She was elsewhere on a ridge far from concrete, boots on dirt that didn't care who she had been. She climbed slowly, deliberately, letting the strain remind her she was still human. At the top she stopped. The wind moved freely there, honest, unfiltered. She reached beneath her collar and traced the tattoo, not counting now, just acknowledging. Names etched into her not as burdens but as witnesses. When she descended, she left no marker behind. No proof she'd been there. That felt right. Months later, a letter arrived at the Foundation, handwritten, careful. "I used to think silence meant weakness," it read. "Now I know it can mean restraint. Thank you for teaching me the difference." May folded the letter and placed it with the others, not archived, not displayed, just kept. That evening she returned to her small home, brewed tea, and sat by the window as dusk settled in. The world dimmed gently. No alarms, no calls. Just quiet. She understood now that redemption wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It arrived slowly, through consistency, through showing up when it was easier not to, through choosing integrity even when no one was keeping score. She had carried the dead. She had guarded the living. And now, finally, she allowed herself to rest. Because sometimes strength isn't proven in battle. Sometimes it's proven in restraint. Sometimes dignity doesn't demand recognition. It doesn't shout. It doesn't threaten. It doesn't need to. Sometimes dignity simply stands its ground and changes the world by refusing to move.